Hey guys, welcome to the 6th episode of Custom Card Reviews. I'll keep the intro short, just wanted to point out that I have noticed the views on these reviews are less and less. So first thing I ask is that if you do like the content, please share it out. But the second thing, and more importantly, is any feedback you have on the reviews. Maybe the formatting isn't the best, maybe they're too long, maybe some other issue. I'm just trying to make sure this is done in the best way. I know folks enjoy seeing their own work featured on this channel, and I've got 60 some odd submissions that I've yet to get to. But if people aren't watching for any particular reason, that puts a damper on the amount of effort people put into their customs. So hopefully we can course correct that. And now let's jump in. This submission is by Yogy, and it is support for the Snow archetype, which is not really much of an archetype. It's more of like a short series of cards that play with ice counters and was never really built upon. And those ice counters typically revolve around effects that stun or disrupt the opponent in some way. So it looks like Yogy is trying to turn that into a full-fledged archetype. Let's see what we have to work with here. Starting with Snow Wolf. This is a pendulum monster. Its scale is 3. It's otherwise a level 4 monster, 1700 attack beast, water. Pendulum effect, target one monster you control that doesn't have an ice counter on it. Special summon this card, then place one ice counter on that monster. You can only use this effect of Snow Wolf once per turn. The monster effect, if this card is normal or special summon, you can add one snow card from your deck to your hand. Once per turn, you can destroy one card you control. Set one snow spell trap from your deck. You can only use each effect of Snow Wolf once per turn. If this card is on the field, if this card on the field is destroyed and added to the extra deck face up, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. Next up is the Snowman. It is another pendulum. Its scale is 9. It's a warrior, level 4 pendulum effect. Once per turn, you can target one monster you control that has one or more ice counters on it. Destroy it, then special summon one level 8 or lower snow monster from your deck, but its effects are negated. Then place the destroyed monster's ice counters on the monster summoned. Its monster effect are if there are 2 or more ice counters anywhere on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only use each of the following effects of the Snowman once per turn. If this card is normal or special summon, you can place one ice counter on each face-up card on the field. Then, if you place 3 or more ice counters by this effect, you can make all snow monsters you control unaffected by your opponent's monster effects for the rest of the turn. Next up is the Snow Dust Hunter. This is a level 8 beast, 2500 attack. You can special summon this card from your hand by removing 4 ice counters from anywhere on the field. All snow monsters you control gain 200 attack for each ice counter they have on them. Once per turn, quick effect, you can remove 4 ice counters from anywhere on the field, activate one of the following effects, destroy all monsters your opponent controls, or destroy all spell and traps your opponent controls. And then we get into the extra deck monster, the Snow Dust Yeti. This is a rank 8 consisting of 2 level 8 water monsters. All cards you control with 1 or more ice counters on them can be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can detach 1 Exceeds material from this card, banish all cards your opponent controls with an ice counter placed on them until the next standby phase. You can only use this effect of Snow Dust Yeti once per turn. Moving into the spells and traps. The field spell is Snowy Peaks. When this card is activated, you can place 2 ice counters on a face-up card on the field. Once per turn, you can reveal 1 snow card in your hand, add 1 snow card from your deck to your hand with a different name than it, then place the reveal card on the bottom of the deck. Once per turn, quick effect, you can target 1 card on the field with 1 or more ice counters on it. Move 1 of its ice counters to a different face-up card on the field. You can only use this effect of Snowy Peaks once per turn. Next is Snowy Resting Place, a continuous spell. When this card is activated, you can add 1 snow monster from your deck to your hand, then place 2 ice counters on this card. Once per turn during the standby phase, you can place 1 ice counter on this card. Once per turn, if a snow monster with 2 or more ice counters on it leaves the field by your opponent's card effect, you can banish 1 card they control, then place 1 ice counter on a face-up card you control. You can only activate 1 Snowy Resting Place per turn. It's a perfect art for that card, by the way. And then the next one is Snowy Chase, another card with all this artwork here is really good. This is all AI generated. It worked out really well. The Snowy Chase is a quick play spell. Target up to 3 monsters your opponent controls. Remove 2 ice counters from any cards you control for each monster targeted. Return that target to the top of the deck in any order. And then for the spells, finally we have Snowy Mover. It's another quick play spell. Take all ice counters on your opponent's side of the field and place them on a face-up card you control or face-up cards you control. You can banish this card from your graveyard. If your opponent controls a face-up card or cards with an ice counter on it, place ice counters on face-up cards you control equal to the number of ice counters on your opponent's side of the field. You can only use each effect of Snowy Mover once per turn. And then finally for the traps, we have Snow Melt as a normal trap. If you control 10 or more ice counters on your side of the field, remove all ice counters from both sides of the field, banish all cards your opponent controls and in their grave face down. If this card is in your graveyard, except the turn this card was sent to the grave and you have 6 or more ice counters on your side of the field, you can banish this card from your grave to draw 2 cards. You can only activate 1 snow melt per turn, and only once that turn, I guess I should say, you can only activate 1 snow melt effect per turn and only once that turn. And then finally, we have the counter trap. Snowy Avalanche. When your opponent activates a spell trap or a monster effect, so here specify a spell trap card or effect or monster effect, or just spell trap card or monster effect. Remove 2 ice counters from anywhere on the field, negate the activation. If you do destroy, you can banish this card from your graveyard, shuffle up to 5 snow monsters from your grave into the deck, then draw 1 card. You can only use the second effect of Snow Avalanche once per turn. Alright, so going back through the cards, first piece of feedback is just a general one, and that is that you have a number of cards here that search cards that have snow in their name. And the thing about a generic word like snow is that it applies to a lot of cards that aren't necessarily in your archetype. So for example, you have Snowman Eater, right? Like this fits the aesthetic of the archetype, but it's not necessarily an archetype card. But this is the least egregious of the examples. Like for example, you have the Fluenderies and the Weather archetypes have a few cards that have snow in their name. You have Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. And of course, there are archetypes that are able to search non-archetype hand traps. Like for example, Blue Eyes can search out Effect Veiler, no problem, with a couple of cards actually. So it's not unheard of, and it's not necessarily a problem in and of itself. It's just something to take into consideration when designing archetypes that are based on words that are shared among non-archetype cards, just to make sure that there isn't any sort of unintended consequences with that naming convention as far as what you're able to search and how you're able to search it. So now we go into Snow Wolf. So Snow Wolf is like the do-it-all card for the deck, right? Like on normal summon or special summon, you can add any 1 snow card from your deck to your hand, and then also you can destroy a card you control to set 1 snow spell trap from your deck. And the thing about it is you can just destroy itself, and it goes immediately back to your Pendulum Zone, where it can then immediately come back to your Monster Zone pretty easily if you have a monster to place an ice counter on. So I say all that because we're kind of in an era of over searching, right? Whether that be Konami cards or custom cards, and I'm guilty of this too sometimes. But I think it's especially concerning when it's a singular card that can pull off those 2 different searches, and there's not really a true cost associated to it. Like, yeah, that second one you destroy a card, but like I mentioned, you could just destroy itself and it just goes back to your Pendulum Zone. So it's not really much of a cost anyways. So maybe split up the effects between Snowman and Snow Wolf, or just change that second effect into something else. The other thing I will say about that last effect is, I think from the Pendulum cards that I know of, when it has something like this where if it would be destroyed, it goes back to your Pendulum Zone, it typically says if this card in your Monster Zone is destroyed, and then it goes back to your Pendulum Zone. So I think that's just a specificity they include there to make sure that there's no confusion for if it were to be destroyed in your Pendulum Zone, then it doesn't just go back to your Pendulum Zone. So that's why it typically tends to say when it's destroyed in your Monster Zone, then you can place it in your Pendulum Zone. Going into the Snowman, I actually really like. So it's great effects for both the monster and for the Pendulum. Relative to the Wolf, I think the man is really well thought out and well balanced and good design for the deck. Same thing with the other monsters, really. The Hunter is really cool. I like its effect. I don't know without testing how easily you can get ice counters on your field, but it seems like on paper like a pretty decent trade-off. Like you have to get rid of 4 to bring him out, and then you have to get rid of 4 to use its effect. So that makes sense. And then the Yeti is also pretty well thought out, where it banishes, and I'm on record for not being a fan of non-targeting quick effect banishing, but the fact that it's temporary is at least a redeemable quality. So I'm cool with the rest of the monster lineup. It's mostly the Wolf that I'm worried about. I think the Hunter, Yeti, and Man are all pretty good to go. Going into the spells, so Snowy Peaks. Like I mentioned about the searching non-archetypal snow cards, so that's just a point of consideration. The other thing here is that you can't have a quick effect on a face-up spell. So whether that be a field spell, a continuous spell, or equip spell, they don't have quick effects. So they either have to be triggered by some sort of thing. So that could be, when a snow monster is summoned or when an ice counter is placed, something like that. Or they have to just be a spell speed one that you trigger on your own time in your own main phase. or maybe they activate at the start or during like once per standby phase or something like that. But yeah, you can't have a quick effect on a field spell like this. I don't think there's an example, a previous example that Konami has that sets the precedent for that. But otherwise, I think this card is good. The resting place, like I mentioned, it's a cool art, good name. I kind of talked about the over-searching dilemma that Yu-Gi-Oh's in. Not necessarily a dilemma by any means, just depends on how you feel about it. I would maybe consider just, especially given the art and the name, maybe this one in particular gets the snow monster from your graveyard to your hand. And that could be of benefit to you because you already have a number of cards that search from the deck. So being able to get a card that gets things back from your graveyard, it could help you out. I know you have the trap that puts monsters back into the deck, so maybe there's a bit of a clash there, but that's just my opinion on the card. The chase, again, is another one of those cards that you just really need to test to see how well balanced it is, because if you amass ice counters pretty easily, then this card could be super busted. Like the fact that it's a quick play and you can get rid of 3 of your opponent's monsters and not just get rid of them, but you put them on top of the deck. That's a pretty powerful form of removal, locking them on their draw as well. So I think maybe just depending on testing, but on paper I would say it probably at least lower that target up to 2 monsters, or increase the ice counter count that you need to remove to be able to trigger that effect. And then the Snowy Mover. The Snowy Mover, I really like this card. It's a clever name and it fits the effect fits the name, so it's a good card for the deck. Moving down into the traps. Snowmelt, again, another one of those cards that's dependent on the testing, how easily you're able to amass ice counters. 10 seems like a good amount for this card, but the fact that it's banishing all cards your opponent controls and in their grave face down, I mean, that's a really powerful effect. If it did seem unbalanced, if it was that you can easily amass 10 counters, then I would just maybe consider limiting it to banishing only monsters, for example. Then the trap card, the counter trap, I think it's pretty good. So no problems with the Avalanche. Moving on to the scoring. So on the design, I give it an 8. So it builds on this unsupported theme and really turns it into a full-fledged archetype with a modernized approach. Small concern about how these cards could inadvertently assist non-archetype snow cards. I don't think it's a concern on paper, but if I'm missing something, someone in the comments can let us know. Creativity, I give an 8 as well. Not only plays to the ice counter gimmick, but the effects are very thematic to the snow concept and aesthetic, so that's a nice touch. And also bonus points on the card names and artwork is really well thought out and overall creative custom batch. And then the balance, I give a 7. Like I mentioned, some of these cards are just hard to judge without seeing it in action. Again, I don't know how fast you can amass ice counters to really leverage a lot of these more powerful effects. I do really like the boss monsters, so your wolf dude and your yeti. It's more so the spells and traps where I have the questions and concerns about, but you at least approached it properly with like those activation requirements and conditions. And so it's all kudos for that. And that gives the average score a 7.7. Thank you, Yogy, for the custom support of the Snow archetype. This submission is by Taty and Toto. This is custom support for the Amaze archetype. So the Amaze archetype is an amusement theme park themed archetype that just mostly focuses on equipping traps to your and your opponent's monsters to trigger various effects. As the submission mentions, quote unquote, I feel the deck can't go second and that the traps they have aren't effective enough. It doesn't have any kind of negation or consistency. Also, it solves the problem you have if you draw too many traps, and with this deck, you will. They may seem broken, but the deck is too bricky to be an engine and too inoffensive to be toxic. I guess I'll be the judge of that, but the fact that you're prefacing it by saying that the cards may be broken is, I guess, giving me a heads up for what to expect. But let's go down the list, starting off with the link here, since there are no main deck monsters. The link is a link 1 Amazement Merchant Horror. Its materials are 1 Amazement monster. If this card is link summoned, you can set 1 Amazement Precious Park directly from your deck. Quick effect, you contribute this card, add 1 Amazement Special Show from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of the merchant once per turn. Just for context, let's go through these 2 cards real quick. So the Precious Park and the Special Show that are named on this card are cards that already exist. They are not the custom cards in this support designed by Konami. So the Precious Park is the field spell of the archetype. During your main phase, you can activate 1 attraction trap the turn it was set. During the end phase, you can send one attraction trap you control equipped to a monster to the grave, then target one of your attraction traps with a different name that is banished or in your grave. Set that card. You can only use each effect of the Precious Spark once per turn. And then the special show is a quick play spell. When your opponent activates a card or effect that targets an amazement monster or monsters you control, target one of those amazement monsters you control, return it to the hand, then you can special summon one amazement monster from your hand. So those are the two cards that this link is able to search. Now let's go down to the custom fusion. Amazement Master of Entertainment, Arlecchino. Two amazement monsters are the materials. Must be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling 2 attraction and or amazement trap cards from your hand, grave, or banished into the deck. When your opponent activates a card effect, quick effect, you contribute this card. The activated effect becomes your opponent equips one monster they control with an attraction trap from your deck. You can only use this effect of Amazement Master Entertainment Arlecchino once per turn. All right, now let's go back into the main deck for the spells and traps, starting with the Amazing Time Store. It's a continuous spell. You can discard one normal trap from your hand, add one Amazing Time ticket from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Amazing Time Store once per turn. Each time an attraction trap is equipped to a monster, place one Amazing Time counter on this card. All amazement monsters you control gain 300 attack and defense for each counter on this card. Now let's delve into the trap cards, starting with the Thunder Tower. Target one amazement monster you control or one face-up monster your opponent controls. Equip this card to it. You can activate the following effect based on which player controls the equipped monster. If you control that monster, target one card your opponent controls, return that target to your hand. If your opponent controls it, special summon one amazement monster from your deck, then send the equipped monster to the grave. And then we have, I believe, the final card, Amazing Time VIP Pass is another normal trap. If your opponent controls a card, you can activate this card from your hand. You can set up to 4 attraction traps with different names directly from your deck. They can be activated this turn. If you activated this effect from your hand, you can only activate the effects of amazement monsters for the rest of the duel. You can only activate one Amazing Time VIP Pass once per turn. So that does it for the Amazing custom support. Let's go back through. All right, so for the Link 1, it is a double search on a Link 1. Might be overdoing it, but I suppose since it's 2 specific cards and not just any cards in the archetype, it's probably fine. And I don't think either of those 2 cards is going to break your board. It's not going to lead into like some infinite combo. So I think it's probably fine. The fusion I think is overall pretty interesting take on an Omni Negate, where instead of like destroying the effect of the card that you're negating, you instead treat it as a different effect that works well for the theme of your deck. I guess the hidden cost here is that you're letting your opponent look at your deck here, but overall I think that's pretty clever take on an Omni Negate. The materials I guess are a bit confusing because you say 2 amazement monsters and then you say it must be special summon by shuffling 2 attraction and or amazement trap cards from a hand, grave, or banishment into the deck. So you would either just need to clarify what the materials exactly are, get rid of that material line, or say must be fusion summoned or special summoned by following this alternative method, and that would just clarify exactly how to bring this guy out. Jumping into the spells, so the Time Store is the spell that searches the spell that searches everything else. So Amazing Time Ticket is another card that already exists in the archetype. You pay 100 life points. It's a quick play spell. On your turn, if you activated it, you add 1 amazement card from deck to hand. If you activate it on your opponent's turn, you set 1 attraction trap directly from your deck and can be activated that turn. So again, it's the Time Store is going to get you the card that then gets you all the other cards. I think it's probably fine. Like the submission mentioned, this deck could use that extra added consistency since you're dealing with a bunch of traps, and this allows you to take advantage of those dead traps by being able to discard it to get the card that can get you the other card. So yeah, it's probably fine. The other effect is pretty cool as well. I think it gives you an extra added boost for using those attraction traps and equipping them to monsters. It gets you some extra attack and defense boost, so that's pretty cool as well. The Thunder Tower is, honestly, I just think you need to flip the effects, where if it's the monster that you control, you can special summon 1 amazing monster from your deck, then send the equipped monster to the grave. And if it's the one your opponent controls, then you can return one card your opponent controls to the hand. Yeah, I think that second effect currently as is just too powerful by basically being able to trade in an opponent's monster for anything from your own deck. I think that's too much for my taste. Again, this deck doesn't all of a sudden become OP by any means with this custom support, but it's just one of those like design practices where you look at a card on its own merits as opposed to comparing it to what's currently out there and just assess, is it really balanced or is it broken? And I think by design that second effect is a tad broken, at least in my opinion. The VIP pass, and then speaking of broken, so it's a +3, right? And typically you could probably, and you mentioned it in your submission, this deck has trouble going second. So if you do go second and you open with this, you can immediately set 4 attraction traps and start to get things going to disrupt your opponent, which I suppose is the intent of the card. So here's the thing about cards like this. I see it often for archetypes that need a lot of help, where there's that one card that's just overly busted, but it allegedly solves the problems for the deck. But the thing about that design practice is, what if you don't open with that card, right? Then your deck is screwed. So it's better to sort of share the wealth of the powerful effects among separate cards, so that no matter which way you open with the deck, you can play accordingly, as opposed to hoping that you draw into that one busted card and being able to basically win if you have it and lose if you don't. So that's just a design philosophy in my opinion. It's not that Konami doesn't do this from time to time, where there's that one card that when you open with it for a specific archetype, you're like really good to go. If you don't, then you're kind of screwed. But that's just my opinion as far as these one card fix all approach is concerned. The other thing about this is the restrictions here. So the restriction is good, right? You have this immediate +3, so you have a very stringent restriction attached to it, where you can only activate the effects of amazement monsters for the rest of the duel. I just think you need to reword it, because the way it looks like is you wouldn't be able to activate those traps you just set, because you can only activate the effects of amazement monsters. So I think what you meant is, if you activate this card from your hand, you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the duel except the effects of amazement monsters. So wording it like that would be the proper way to go. So that does it for the card by card take. Let's score it. On the design, I give an 8. So it builds on that Amaze archetype while addressing some of those weaknesses that the submission mentioned, like the slowness of the traps, the being stuck with a handful of traps, the inability to go second. So that's all good. The creativity, I give a 6. 4 of these 5 are just really, really strong search or summoning effects, and then you have the Omni Negate. So not the most creative approach, but again, it's the creativity isn't like the score that really matters all that much. It's really more about the design and the balance, and whether or not for archetypes that already exist, are you addressing the issues that exist within the archetype, and I think you are here, so don't really mind the creativity score too much. I give it above average anyways, but yeah, 6 on the creativity. And then the balance, I give a 6 as well. I think a couple of cards here are a bit much without testing. For example, like the VIP pass. So that's just my personal take on it without, again, having tested the cards. I can't really say how OP they are. But again, it just goes back to the standard practice of balancing, where you shouldn't have cards that just willy-nilly get you more than a +1 without some sort of investment attached to it. And that's why it just raises a red flag for me. Not to say it isn't balanced or not to say that, again, this deck becomes meta all of a sudden, but just from a design philosophy standpoint, there are a couple of things that raise concern in my mind, so that's why I give the balance a 6. And so that gives the average score a 6.7. Thank you, Taty and Toto, for your support of the Amaze archetype. This submission is by 420 Templar. Thank you for being a supporter of the channel. It is called the Fleeting Flare archetype and based around the card Raging Flame Sprite. So that's a bit of an older card from 2004. Let's take a quick look. It has a 100 attack. It can attack directly, and if it inflicts damage via direct attack, it gains a 1000 attack. So a slow burn, especially for back in the day, that makes sense. But this deck aims to make it the centerpiece of a modernized deck. The context included in the submission says this deck aims to equip different Union monsters to Raging Flame Sprite, increasing its attack, which can then be used as a resource to activate different abilities, such as destroying a monster with lower attack or negating spells and traps. Then you can follow this up by attacking directly with your buffed up Raging Flame Sprite for the win. Alright, so now let's jump into the custom cards, starting with Oriana, the Fleeting Flare, takes flight as the level 1 Pyro Fire Monster Union. You can tribute this card from your hand or field, add 1 Raging Flame Sprite from your deck or grave to your hand. Also, you can normal summon 1 Raging Flame Sprite in addition to your normal summoner set this turn. You can only gain this effect once per turn. If this card is in your grave, you can target 1 Raging Flame Sprite in your grave, special summon it, and if you do, equip this card to it and increase its attack by 1,000. While this card is equipped to Raging Flame Sprite, when your opponent activates a spell, trap card, or effect, you can reduce the equipped monster's attack by exactly 1,000, negate the activation, and if you do destroy that card, you can only use each effect of Oriana once per turn. Next up is Nito, the Fleeting Flare Engine, another fire level 1 Pyro Union monster. If this card is normal or special summon, you can add to your hand or set 1 Fleeting Flare spell trap from your deck. Also, you can be activated that turn. Quick effect, target 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control, equip this card to that target, and if you do, increase its attack by 1,000, or unequip this card and special summon it. During either player's turn, while this card is equipped to Raging Flame Sprite, target 4 Fleeting Flare cards in your grave, shuffle them into the deck, and if you do, the equipped monster can make a second attack during this turn's battle phase. You can only use each effect of Nito once per turn. Just a quick point of order on PSCT. So these ignition-like effects, the ones where you decide when you want to activate them or not, whether that be a quick effect or an actual ignition effect, you would just need to say that you can. Right now, it's kind of worded as a mandatory effect, and then it's not really clear when exactly it activates. But over here, you would say, quick effect, you can target 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control, and then the rest of the effect. Same thing down here. During either player's turn, while this card is equipped to Raging Flame Sprite, you can target 4 Fleeting Flare cards in your grave, and then go into the rest of the effect. Next up is LOD Fleeting Flare Dispatcher, is a level 4 Fire Pyro Union monster. If you control a Raging Flame Sprite, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is special summoned, you can special summon 1 Fleeting Flare monster from your deck, except LOD. Also, you can only attack with 1 monster for the rest of the turn. There again, you can target 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control, equip this card to that target, and if you do, increase its attack by 1,000, or unequip this card and special summon it during either player's turn. You can reduce the equipped monster's attack by exactly 1,000, draw 1 card. You can only use each effect of LOD once per turn. And then we get into Sayani, the Fleeting Flare's Final Flight. This is a dark Pyro monster, level 3, another union. If this card is normal or special summon, you can target 1 Fleeting Flare spell trap card in your grave, set it. Target 1 there again, you can target 1 Raging Flare Flame Sprite you control, equip this card to that target, and if you do, increase its attack by 1,000, or unequip it and special summon it. You can only use each of the preceding effects of Sayani once per turn. Once per turn during either player's turn, while this card is equipped to Raging Flame Sprite, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls with less attack than the equipped monster, destroy it. Also, decrease the equipped monster's attack by 1,000. And then finally, for the main deck monsters, is Eighth Knee, the Fleeting Flare Wingmate, is a Fire level 4 Pyro Union. When your opponent activates a monster effect while you control Raging Flame Sprite, quick effect, you can equip this card from your hand to 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control. Target 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control. There again, you can target 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control, equip this card to that target, and if you do, increase its attack by 1,000, or unequip this card and special summon it. You can only use each of the preceding effects of Eighth Knee once per turn. While this card is equipped to Raging Flame Sprite, if the equipped monster is targeted by a card or effect, you can reduce the equipped monster's attack by exactly 1,000, and if you do, negate that effect. Now let's jump into the custom spells, starting with Fleeting Flare Ignition Pad. This is the field spell of the deck. When this card is activated, you can special summon 1 Fleeting Flare monster from your deck. Also, you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn except Pyro monsters. Your Raging Flame Sprite gain 1,000 attack. Also, they cannot be tributed. During either player's turn, while you control a Raging Flame Sprite, you can reduce the attack of a Raging Flame Sprite you control by exactly 3,000. Bench 1 card your opponent controls. You can only use each effect of the Ignition Pad once per turn. Next up is Fleeting Flare's Fantastical Flight. You're really making me alliterate all these Fs. So, quick play spell. Target 1 Raging Flame Sprite you control. Banish any number of Fleeting Flare monster cards you control until the beginning of the next phase. For the rest of the turn, you can activate the effects of Fleeting Flare monsters you control as quick effects. Then apply the following effects based on the number of cards banished this way. It is unaffected by your opponent. If 1 or more, it is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects this turn. I'm guessing you're referring to the targeted monster. I would just make that clear. The targeted monster is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects this turn. 2 or more, you gain 500 life points for each card banished. And 3 or more, you can special summon 1 Fleeting Flare Fusion monster from your extra deck. This is treated as a fusion summon. You can only activate 1 Fleeting Flare Fantastical Flight per turn. Alright, we'll get to the fusion here in a second, but one more custom card in the main deck. That is the Trap of the deck. Fleeting Flare Flight Plans. Trap card, continuous. If a Raging Flame Sprite you control would be destroyed by card effect, you can send this card to the grave instead. If this card was activated this turn, place 1 Fleeting Flare card from your deck on top of the deck. You can target one Raging Flame sprite you control, special summon one Fleeting Flare Union monster that's equipped to it, then equip one Fleeting Flame Union monster one Union monster to it from your hand or deck. So basically, special summons one that was equipped to it and then gets you another one from your hand or deck. You can only use each effect of Fleeting Flare Flight Plans once per turn. Now let's get to the extra deck monsters. Elysia, the Fantastical Fleeting Flare, is the fusion of the deck. This looks like a 3, 6, 9, 10. It's hard to see sometimes. Light Pyro Fusion, also a Union, 1500 attack, 3000 defense. Its materials are Raging Flame Sprite plus 3 Fleeting Flare monsters. If this card is special summon, you can target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. If this card is in your grave, you can reduce the attack of a Raging Flame Sprite you control by exactly 2000. Special summon this card. Quick effect, target one Raging Flame Sprite you control, equip this card to that target, and if you do, increase its attack by 1000, or unequip this card and special summon it. You can only use each effect of Elysia once per turn. And then finally, we have the Link Yuri Fleeting Flare's Guiding Light, a fire Link 1 Pyro. One Fleeting Flare monster or Raging Flame Sprite is the material. Cannot be used as Link material the turn it is Link summon. While you control Raging Flame Sprite, your opponent's monsters can only target a Raging Flame Sprite for attacks. Quick effect, target one Raging Flame Sprite you control. Equip a Fleeting Flare Union monster you control to that target, and if you do, increase its attack by 1000. Or unequip a Union monster card equipped to it and special summon it. You can only use this effect of Yuri Fleeting Flare's Guiding Light once per turn. So that does it for the cards. Now let's go back up to the top. Actually, this submission included a replay, so let's give that a quick look. So it's a 1-card starter, starting with the Nito. Normal summon that, use its effect to grab a Fleeting Flare spell or trap. It's going to grab the Field Spell. Field Spell is going to activate Edition Pad. On activation, special summons a Fleeting Flare monster from the deck. So that'll grab Elodie, and when she's summoned, she can grab another Fleeting Flare monster from the deck, and that's going to be the Oriana. Oriana has the effect to tribute, to add a Raging Flame Sprite from deck or grave to the hand. So let's grab the actual Raging Flame Sprite, and then again grants you the additional normal summon of the Flame Sprite, so do that. It gains 1000 attack thanks to the Field Spell. Going to send it to the grave to Link summon the Yuri. And then we'll use Oriana's Graveyard effect to special summon the Raging Flame Sprite in the grave and equip it with the Oriana. So it's going to gain now 1000 attack from the field as well as 1000 attack from Oriana. So now it's at 2100. Going to use Elodie to equip it to Raging Flame Sprite, putting it at now 3100. And then we'll equip it with Nito, putting it at 4100. Use Elodie's other effect where you can reduce the Raging Flame Sprite attack by 1000 to draw a card. So that'll get Effect Veiler. And then proceed to end phase. During the opponent's turn, you can use Yuri's effect to special summon back Nito, and Nito on summon will grab a Fleeting Flare spell trap. You can either set it or add it to the hand, so you're going to set the Fantastical Flight, that's a quick play spell, and it can be activated that turn, and so that's going to help you get set up with all those protections and even the fusion monster in this case, since you would be able to banish 3 of your Fleeting Flare monsters. And so that is a quick look at the Fleeting Flare deck in action. All right, so going into the feedback of the deck. So one general point is that about Union monsters, when they're equipped, they're treated as spells. And I'm sure you know that. It's just the thing about face-up spells is that they can't have quick effects. So this is a piece of feedback that applies not just to your Unions, but to some of your spells as well, particularly that Field Spell. The various Unions that you have at least have a workaround where you can either make them all spell speed 1 effects, so that would be trigger effects or ignition effects. Or if you wanted to maintain them as quick effects, you could then make them gained effects. So when this monster is equipped to Raging Flame Sprite, that Raging Flame Sprite gains this effect, bullet point, quick effect. You can reduce the monster's attack by exactly 1000. When your opponent activates a spell trap card, you can reduce the attack by 1000. So this what I'm talking about especially refers to these gained effects here, such as the negation of the spell trap, such as the popping a monster, such as the drawing a card. And then I also noticed that a lot of your Union monsters have a quick effect on their unionization effect. So when they equip themselves to a monster or unequip themselves to special summon themselves, that's the thing as well, where it makes sense while it's a monster to have a quick effect to equip it to Raging Flame Sprite, but it doesn't make sense while it's equipped to have a quick effect to bring it back out. It goes against the rules, and the proof is in the fact that if we look at all the Union monsters that are currently out, not a single one of them has a quick effect. Not just for any of their effects, but especially for their unionizing effect. So if we look at one that was released pretty recently, Wide Dragon Yearhead, This is a ignition effect, right? A spell speed 1 once per turn. You can either target one machine monster you control, equip this card to that, or unequip it and special summon it. So you're never going to see a Union monster with a quick effect to equip itself or unequip itself. And I know that the intention behind that is to speed up the Union aspect of the deck, but it's just, it is what it is with Union monsters. They're slow by nature, and since Konami hasn't already made that a thing that they can quick effect, unequip, and equip themselves, I'm going to go out here and say that this is not going to fly in terms of a rules standpoint. So that's something that's going to, I know, change a lot of the design of your deck, because it probably relies on that speed of the quick effect. So it's just something you're going to have to mess around with until you can get it to align with how Union monsters are intended to work. So going down the cards one by one though, and that's a pretty big piece of feedback. Again, it's going to shift a lot of your deck, but the good news is that at least individually, I really like most of these, all of these cards. Oriana, I think it's a unique take on Unions by being able to equip it from the grave, so that's a solid. Nito's a neat, solid card. LD is, it's good. I've been on record saying I need to see restrictions on effects that special summon from the deck, and you have one there where you can only attack with one monster for the rest of the turn. I'm not really so sure how much of a restriction that really is. Typically, you see things like you can only, kind of like what you did with your field spell, which we'll get to in a second, but you can only summon pyro monsters for the rest of your turn. You can only summon fleeting flare monsters for the rest of your turn, something like that. But also your range of targets for LD aren't so great, so it's not breaking the deck by any means, but overall I think it's fine. Sayani is another card where I love the premise of it. It's just the same thing I mentioned about the quick effects. And then you could also just, instead of making this a gained effect, this would actually make sense as a trigger effect, right? Where once per turn, when your opponent summons a monster, you can destroy that monster if it has less attack than the equipped Raging Flame Sprite, then lower the equipped monster's attack by 1,000. So it could work like that, where you would still be able to get it on your opponent's turn at your choosing. Aethne is another good card. You're pretty solid on your PSCT, so I think with the last effect you intended it as a continuous one in order to combo with the first effect, so that when your opponent activates something, you can quick effect equip it, and then you would immediately gain this effect instead of having to wait for the chain to end and then starting with the next chain. So you would immediately get this effect where you can reduce the equipped monster attack by exactly 1,000 if you do negate that effect. The thing here though is that I don't know off the top of my head any effects that read like this where you have something happening in addition to the negation. So in this case, the attack reduction kind of makes it feel like it should be an activated effect, not a continuous effect. So I'm just trying to reword it. Maybe something like when the effect of a card that targets the equipped monster resolves, you can reduce the equipped monster's attack by 1,000 and negate the effect instead. So that would at least keep the wording consistent with how a lot of these other continuous effects seem to work. Because again, I think you're intending it to combo with that first effect to a quick effect equip itself to the Raging Flame Sprite in order to gain this effect in the same chain that you're responding to your opponent's monster effect with the first effect. So that's just my feedback on that. Going into the spells, so Ignition Pad, again, same thing about the special summon from the deck, but here you do have that restriction, so that's good. But I'm obviously, as we saw in the replay, the intention here is that this basically brings out two monsters, right? You bring out your LD, and LD brings out another monster. Again, your range of targets isn't so great where I think it's going to bust anything. It's just, I always just approach it with at least some hesitation because of how, if you intend to expand the deck, or how it might interact with other cards already out there, or how other decks may be able to take advantage of that mini engine to be able to easily bring out two monsters in one fell swoop. So that's just why I tend to be more shy about it. But since you do have the restriction on only summoning pyro monsters for the rest of the turn, I think you should be fine. The other thing about this card is the same point, again, about the unions, is that you can't have a quick effect on a face-up spell, whether that be a continuous spell, equip spell, or field spell. So you would have to just reword this. And again, I know you're trying to get a lot of that disruption in there, and that's why it's intended as a quick effect, but you can reduce the attack. Yeah, you just have to find some other way to be able to trigger it on your opponent's turn, otherwise just make it an ignition, a spell speed 1 effect that would only activate on your turn at your choosing. And then finally, the trap card. So the trap card is, oh sorry, I skipped a card. The quick play card. All right, so I kind of came out in my tone of voice when I read this. Next phase, so that's not really much of a cost here. Let's be honest. Let's be honest here. I would say this card is actually really, really good. I like everything about it except the part where it's just until the beginning of the next phase. So what I would do to make it perfect, and at least in my opinion, is just staple on here that this has to activate during the main phase. So then this actually means something, because right now it doesn't really mean anything, because you can just activate it during your opponent's draw phase or your standby phase, and then you immediately get him back in that following phase. So if you are forced to activate this card in your main phase, then you at least have to go the rest of the main phase to be able to get all those cards back. So then it at least balances it out. But otherwise, I think this card is really good. And then the same thing with the trap card is just a really good card for the deck. I like the design of it. Going into the extra deck monsters, Elijah, however it's meant to be said. So this is a really good card. I like that the first effect combos with the deunionizing effect. So when it's special summoned, it targets a card on the field and destroys it. So that's really good. From what I see, Fantastical Flight, that quick play is the only way to bring this out, at least in archetype-wise. Otherwise, you'd have to rely on a fusion spell, polymerization, super poly, whatever. Since it is a union-based deck, so think about examples from ABC, XYZ, you could just make it a contact fusion, so have the ability to special summon it through your quick play, but also be able to contact fuse into it as well. I know you give up a lot of resource to bring it out since it's 4 monsters that are required of it. But at least give yourself the option to be able to bring it out in an alternate fashion. And then Yuri. So Yuri is another card. It's a good extender for the deck. Good overall card. I would recommend to actually beef it up a little bit here, where you say that while you control Raging Flame Sprite, your opponent can only target a Raging Flame Sprite for attack. You could consider that instead of it kind of serving as a protector for all your other monsters, especially if you aim to beef up your Raging Flame Sprite, instead of having it worded this way, you could make it so that your opponent is forced to attack your Raging Flame Sprite. That kind of depends on how often you're able to beef up your Raging Flame Sprite. If it's typically 3,000 plus, then that could really work in your favor, where your opponent has to attack it with the monsters on their field. And so that's just something you could take into consideration to possibly beef up this card. So, getting into the grading, overall, the design I give a 6. I think the premise is all there. It just needs some rework to take into account those spell speed rules and how the effects can be activated. So depending on how you go through and edit and what that ends up looking like, just will dictate how well or not well the deck functions. Creativity, I give a 7. I appreciate the effort on shining the light on an older card. We've certainly seen the idea of boosting one central card in other archetypes, but I think the approach here was unique and fitting for a card for the card in question by modulating the attack to take advantage of its own effect, as well as to take advantage of some of the other effects. So you're increasing its attack to be able to take advantage of its direct attack effect, but then you're also decreasing its attack to be able to trigger a bunch of those other effects. And so it works really well in concert. And then the balance, I give an 8. So nothing really sticks out here as glaringly broken. Just a couple of notes here and there to refine it. But overall, I think this is well thought out in terms of the pros and cons of the deck. And with that, an average score of a 7. Thank you 420 Templar for your submission. So that does it for episode 6. Thank you again to 420 Templar, Yogy, and Taty and Toto for your submissions. Quick note, with this video, I have finished submissions through August 8th. So if you submitted before that and haven't seen yours, hit me up in the comments, and I will catch you guys next time.